My name is Bapa Jhala, and we are talking about, I'm answering questions that Paul Osario is going to be asking me. It is connected with the project that he is working on, which is the Swaminarayan faith, as manifest in Gujarat and the United States, with his partner Krishna Pandya. And this is an interview or a set of questions based on my ideas about Hindu belief systems in the 20th century and some background of how they came to be. I think it's very important for us to understand that Gujarat is possibly the most diverse of Indian provinces. It has the longest coastline of any province in India. It has the largest diversity, ethnic, religious, and caste diversity of any province in all of India. And this is not an accident, or one might call it an accident of history and geography, in the sense of where it's located. It's located right at the edge of the Arabian Sea. So over history it has had contact with the continent of East Africa, the waterways of the Red Sea, the Arabian Peninsula, the waterways of the Persian Gulf. And of course, not only is it from a maritime point of view that is connected with the world outside the subcontinent, but it was also the port, the principal port of antiquity, and even until recent times were located on the west coast in Gujarat, in Bharuch and other locations, bigger ones on the mainland and several on the peninsula itself, all the way to Kutch, that allowed for a lot of trade that moved from overseas into North India through those ports, as well as from the mainland going out into Africa, Arabia, and the Orient. So Gujarat, therefore, was always a point of exchange and interaction with the world behind it, in terms of the continent of India itself, as well as the lands and peoples beyond India.
Okay. What can you tell me about the socioeconomic conditions in India around the turn of the 18th century? I'm sorry, in Gujarat.
In Gujarat.
Yeah.
It's very important to understand that the history of Gujarat, and especially the history of the peninsula of Kathiawar, which is that peninsula that looks like a mango and sticks out towards the Arabian Peninsula, has been a history that is tied to a local dynamic as well as a dynamic that connects it with the mainland. It's not an accident that it is. I think it's more useful to understand the continent of India, to see it in juxtaposition and similarity with the continent of Europe, rather than to see it as the states of the United States of America, because all these territories that make up Europe, and similarly all the territories of the modern provinces of India, are made up by distinct peoples, distinct histories, distinct languages, all of that suggesting that there was both an independent growth of culture in different locales on the continent of India, and then an interdependent growth that put these particular regions in touch with each other. And the bridges that brought these together, if they were isolated notions of language and region and history, there were also bridging notions that connected these, and one of the most important bridges was that of religion. And therefore you will find that the Hindu faith or the Muslim faith or the Islamic faith, Buddhist faith, Jain faith, and Sikh faith, even though they may be, sometimes their births may be connected or the emphasis may be connected to certain regions initially. They are pan-Indic phenomena, and they are not restricted to a particular geography. This is important for us to understand, that in Gujarat itself today, we have a very large Hindu population. That is the dominant population. But up 60 years ago, when India was still under British rule, very little is known that there were something like 14 or 15 Muslim principalities ruled by Muslim kings in Gujarat. And that these Muslim kings were by descent, some were African, meaning black kings, others were from the Gulf of Aden, others were Turks, others were Afghans. In other words, these Muslim dynasties came from many parts of the world to rule over certain parts of Gujarat. And simultaneous to that, there were these Hindu kingdoms. But the Hindu kingdoms too were all mixed in the sense that not all of them were Rajput. The dominant number of kingdoms that ruled Gujarat were Rajput. But there were others that were not Rajput. There were Kathi, there's a few that were Patidar, there's even one that was in fact Brahmin. So that this notion, both in terms of the diversity of what constitutes the political mosaic of Gujarat, was something that was very important in its diversity, in its heterogeneity, rather than, even though it was united by a language, it was not necessarily as so-called Hindu-dominated monolith as it may appear now. And this is important for us to understand how new faiths were particularly able to find a good foundation in Gujarat. And I think this is important because we're going to be talking about the Swaminarayan faith. To give a kind of background about the two kinds of religions in India, one which I would call Indic grown, the grown religions of India that came out from within India, coming out from what I would call a Hindu ethos, but then reformist movements that found what was coexisting at the time not adequate, and the great religions of the world that came out of this climate of discourse at different periods in history. 500 years BC, before the birth of Christ, there was reform movements of the Jain and of Jainism and Buddhism.
Now, what kind of social conditions are conducive to these sort of reforms?
Clearly, it seems to me, I'm not a historian per se, but based on my general understanding, change often happens when there's ferment and disquiet, dissatisfaction with what exists, which allows for the emergence of new ideas. There has to be a sense of inadequacy of the present time. The orthodoxy of the present time is not satisfying the needs, and therefore reformist movements, and there are always reformist movements occurring, challenging the status quo, challenging the orthodoxy. But they don't surface into major movements until there's adequate resonance and adequate embrace by a large population. Or let's put it that way, if not a large population, a population that in time will grow. So even if initially there may be a few adherents to a new way of thinking, that the strength of that belief system has to be appealing, populist, so that it can in fact be embraced by a larger number of people who, as it becomes known, begin to embrace it. So to suggest then that the periods before when Buddhism and Jainism came into being, there was a certain level of corruption in